right. Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate that. All right. So we'll be in Matthew chapter 9, starting verse 35. So I'm going to be reading verses 35 through 38 here. And so this is continuing on from where we left off last week. Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into this harvest field." So as we continue from last week, we're here in Matthew chapter 9, verse 35. You know, some of the things I picked up here is Jesus' compassion, his caring for the people, his teaching, his healing. He came into the world and he went into so many towns and villages, and that Jesus just desired that none be lost. And as Jesus met people, he was just moved to compassion. So he saw people where they were at. And we're seeing a Jesus that cares deeply about people in the face of their problems. And when I think about my own challenges, when I think about things I'm going through, I look for ways to avoid trouble. I looked at how to avoid challenges or found ways around them. But Jesus went right to the center of it. He went right through the middle of it. And so where we ended up last week was Jesus was being unfairly criticized. And this could have stopped Jesus, but it didn't. Jesus was accused of blaspheming. He was accused of ungodliness. He was being accused of being partners with the devil. But this didn't deter Jesus. His compassion motivated him to teach and to heal and to prepare his disciples. And verse 36 describes the people as being lost. And this is not only a reflection of the people, but also the religious leaders' failing of the time. Verse 38 describes the people as being ready for the harvest. And what was lacking was there were not workers to bring in the harvest. And so Jesus had compassion, and he was teaching his disciples to carry on the ministry that he was building, because he knew that the message needed to get out and he needed people to do that. So we'll move on to Matthew chapter 10. And in Matthew 10, this is one of 4 accounts where it talks about the sending out of the 12. And verse 1 says that he gave them power to drive out evil spirits and to heal the sick. And so I want us, as we read through Matthew, the first 4 verses here in chapter 10, I want you to notice the disciples. And so I ask, can I get someone to read through the first 4 verses, Matthew chapter 10, verses 1 through 4? Can I get a volunteer to read? Matthew chapter 10, verses 1 through 4. All right, I'll go ahead and read this one. Jesus called the 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew. James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. Philip and Bartholomew. Thomas and Matthew the tax collector. James, son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus. Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. So we've got the accounting of the apostles. And so what do you notice about these 12? What stands out to you in the first 4 verses here of Matthew chapter 10? Any similarities or differences amongst these people?
I'll jump in there, David.
All right, thanks, Ryan.
Like we discussed last week, it's really a diverse group. Mm-hmm. Some are fishermen, some are tax collectors, some are brothers. There's interrelationships within the group, but it really is kind of a ragtag group of men. Most are not educated. Some are maybe a little bit, but Jesus had in mind, we think, that he would develop these men, even though they weren't prominent individuals.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Roger. You nailed a ton of points here. I've got my notes as well. Diversity was the first thing that stood out. These people, varying backgrounds, uneducated. Most of them, they'd heard of Jesus, they've heard his teachings, but they didn't grow up in the synagogues. They didn't grow up being formally trained as rabbis. There were two pairs of brothers. And so if we look at it, we've got quite a bit of diversity here. And so the message of the gospel unites. And so I think that's one of the fruits of the gospel, is that it unites people that have varied backgrounds. Just diversity doesn't really cause a problem with the gospel. And so when I also look at it, I also noticed that in one verse they're called disciples, and then in another verse they're called apostles. And so what's the distinction? What do you all see as the distinction between a disciple and an apostle? Like, are they interchangeable, or is there a different meaning here?
There's a different meaning to the words. A disciple is a learner.
Mm-hmm.
An apostle is one that is sent. So they have to be the disciple before they can be the apostle, the one that is sent as an ambassador.
Yeah, that's spot on, Greg. So disciples are followers, they're imitators, they're men and women who must be taught of God. They're people that lack knowledge, they lack experience. While a disciple is a student, it's one who's learning from a teacher. An apostle is one who is sent. So it's someone sent to deliver teachings, things that they would have learned as a disciple. Apostle can also mean messenger. As Greg said, it's one who is being sent to deliver or spread a teaching to others. And so while all apostles were disciples, not all disciples were apostles. 1 Corinthians 1:26 says, "Brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth." And so when I think of the 12 disciples who became apostles, I'm trying to relate to this. So I'm thinking about, when's the last time we had a calling? So I think about the workplace. I think about, when was the last time you went for a job interview? Or maybe you're in a position where you hire people, where you look at people's resumes. And so when we're applying for a job, if you've worked on a resume recently, you look to see, how do we highlight our education? How do we bring focus to our experience? And when someone brings up and asks us the tough question in the interview, what's our biggest weakness? We're tempted to say things like we work too hard or we never give up. And I think it's important to note that Jesus does not look at people the way we do, that he measures people differently. If I was beginning a church, if I was there and I was called to plant churches, I would look for people that had experience planting churches, going into new cities, creating and executing a church plan. That's not the way Jesus went about it. He didn't go to the religious leaders of the day. He didn't go to the people that were best trained and most qualified. Jesus said, I'll take those that don't have any formal training. You know how to mend nets? You know how to sail a boat? Great. Follow me and I'll teach you how to fish for people. The other interesting thing I noticed is that when Jesus called, people had to provide an answer. They could have stayed at home. They could have lived their lives, and the next day could have been the same as the one before, but they were moved by Jesus. There was something about Jesus, about the way he interacted with people, his compassion, his authority, his knowledge. There was just a charisma and an ability that Jesus had to draw people in. And when Jesus called the disciples, he trained them. And he didn't send them off to a school. He trained them firsthand. He taught them and he equipped them. Verse 1, chapter 10 says that he gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and heal the sick. One other interesting item is there are 4 locations in the New Testament where the 12 are called out. And there are some similarities in each of these passages. In each of them, Peter is mentioned first in each account, and he's followed by reference to the 2 pairs of brothers, so Peter and Andrew, James and John. In each account, there appears to be 3 groups of 4 men, and someone called out in advance, presumably the leader of that group. So let's take a look at a couple of the apostles here. So Simon's called out in Matthew as a Canaanite. And we're told in Luke's gospel that Simon was a zealot. So that's in Luke 6, verse 15. And so what else do we know about Simon? So we've got Josephus. He's a first century Roman and Jewish historian. He tells us that zealots were extreme patriots. These were men who valued freedom above life itself. These were men who were willing to sacrifice their own lives and even the lives of their own families to see them martyred in order that they might be free. They preferred freedom to life. They were willing to do whatever was necessary to obtain freedom. And here Jesus calls one. And these were people that were constantly rebelling against the Roman government. So we've got Simon the Zealot. And so who else do we have here in the group? Well, let's take Matthew for a moment. And what do we know about him? We've got Matthew as a tax collector, probably a publican. And what did this mean? And what did people think about this? Well, Matthew was one that had more or less sold out to the enemy because he was collecting taxes for the hated Roman government. So the Jews would have hated Matthew. So we've got 2 extremes here. We've got Simon and Matthew, and if they had met under any other circumstances, Simon would probably have torn Matthew apart. We've got a zealot, someone who hates the Roman Empire and the oppression for which it stands for in his mind, one who is willing to fight and overthrow it, one who is willing to go to death for what he believes in. And then we've got someone else who may have been called a turncoat, a traitor, someone who's exploiting people for the sake of the government. So I think it's interesting how Christ takes people from so many different backgrounds, even adverse backgrounds, and brings them together, oil and water. And so I'm not sure how to put together a comparison to today, but possibly if you were to take the most extreme right-wing person and the most extreme left-wing person and said, you 2 are now going on a mission trip together. You're going to a foreign country where you'll be the only 2 each other know. You're both outsiders and you come from completely different places, and now you have to rely on each other and trust each other. This is going to be your best friend. So we won't go into the rest of the 12 in detail, but it's interesting to note that there really aren't any great people. So Roger mentioned that among them. Most are uneducated. None are really well known. None we would really consider highly successful in the community. These are ordinary people that you would encounter. 4 fishermen, 1 a tax collector. We're not really given much of a background on some of the others, but we can just think that these are common everyday Joes. So if you consider yourself ordinary, nothing special, great. God can use you. In fact, he built his kingdom based upon these people. So moving down to verse 5 and following are going to tell us where the apostles are going and how they're to go about this mission they're being set upon. Looking at verses 5 through 8, can I get someone to read Matthew chapter 10, verses 5 through 8? If you would just unmute your phone. Matthew chapter 10, verses 5 through 8. All right, I'll go ahead and read. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. As you go, proclaim this message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. So the instructions here are for the apostles are first to go to the Jews. Jesus was teaching and preaching in the region of Galilee. Now Jesus is expanding the area with his apostles. There's a common theme in the Bible. The message is first taken to the Jews and then to the others, the Gentiles. Romans 1:6 says, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile." So Jesus is sending out the apostles to the Jews first, and then the Gentiles. Later, Jesus said, "When the Holy Spirit comes upon you, you will be witnesses unto me, not only in Judea, but also in Samaria, and unto the uttermost parts of the earth." That's Acts chapter 1, verse 8. But for right now, they're confined, or they're restricted to the Galilean region, to the Jewish communities, the lost sheep of Israel.
Who was he even talking about?
So looking at this, as
I don't record anything.
about what message is he's asking the apostles to send out? What message are they to proclaim?
One piece of the message is the same that Jesus proclaimed: repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near.
Yeah, Jesus talks a lot about the kingdom of heaven. I was looking, studying for this, and I pulled up some commentary from Chuck Smith, and he talks about the kingdom and about being a citizen. He says, "As a citizen of the United States, I have many benefits. Even when I travel in a foreign country, there are certain protections that I have as a citizen of the United States. Should I get into trouble, there are always those embassies to which I can turn, who are there to help the citizens of the United States out of whatever difficulty they may find themselves in. And those within the embassies in these foreign countries will seek to help those citizens of the United States. That's just one of the benefits of citizenships. Because I'm a citizen, they'll go to bat for me, and they'll speak for me, and they'll pull strings for me. Because I'm a citizen of the United States, and the United States has an obligation to guarantee its citizens certain rights, certain privileges. So I enjoy being a citizen of the United States because of those rights and privileges I have as a citizen. But I am also a citizen of a kingdom, the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. And I tell you, the rights and privileges that I have as a citizen of the kingdom of heaven far exceed the rights and the privileges I have as a citizen of the United States. Wherever I go, I have protection. I have authority, the authority of the kingdom of heaven behind me. Jesus is saying, now go out and preach, saying, herald it. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. And they were to demonstrate the aspects of the kingdom of heaven by healing the sick, cleansing the lepers, raising the dead, and casting out the devils. Matthew chapter 10, verse 8. So moving down to verse 9, we'll read through Matthew 9, verses 9 through 15, about how the apostles are to be prepared and how they are to travel. Starting in verse 9, do not get any gold or silver or copper, or take with you in your belts no bag for the journey, or extra shirt, or sandals, or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep. Whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person and stay at their house until you leave. As you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet. Truly, I tell you, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. Well, I don't know about you, but before the pandemic, before COVID, whenever I would travel, I would spend a lot of time preparing for travel, much more than Jesus told the apostles. I would look at where I'm going. I would look at the weather. I would look at how I was going to get there. I would look at how much money I needed to take, what I was going to do in that place. There was so much preparation to be done. But what message is Jesus sending his disciples here about their travel? What do you think Jesus is trying to communicate to his apostles and how he is telling them about to go about the work he's sending them out for?
I think the first thing is that on this commission or on this mission, they're to depend on the Jewish concept of hospitality. Whereas when they go into the world, they take all of this stuff. They take an extra shoes, extra shirt. They take money, but in this situation, they depend on Jewish hospitality.
Thanks, Greg. I think Jewish hospitality is one piece. I think the other piece is he's teaching them reliance on the Father. I think he's saying that you're to go in faith, and without external means, without help, this can't be done on our own. And so some of that is through the hospitality of the people they will stay at, through people of faith. And it's also, I think it's a way to force them to action. So when they come to a house, when they come to a city, when they come to a town that is not welcoming, I think he wants them to quickly understand where the message is being received and where to invest, but then also where the city is not welcoming, not to spend too much time there, right? Don't waste your time constantly talking to a wall. So I think Jesus is telling the apostles that God will provide. And I think he's also preparing them for the fact that they will see rejection as well, that there will be fruits of their labor and there will also be rejection. Barclay describes how Jews were supposed to enter the Temple Mount, and I think there's a connection here as well. And the idea is that when a man entered the temple, he was to make it quite clear that he had left everything which had to do with his trade and his business, his workday, and his affairs behind. And so if you look at the Jewish laws and you look at how they were to enter the temple, no one was to go to the Temple Mount with a staff. You were not to go with money or dusty feet. Your intention there was to go to the presence of God and to be about the work of God. And I think Jesus is continuing this, where if people would have come prepared, if people would have brought a lot of luggage and supplies, I think there would have been a weakening of both the messenger and of the message, where there was other reasons for that person to be sustained. But here Jesus is teaching the apostles reliance upon God and reliance on the people that will receive them. Moving down to verses 16 through 23, I think we see that Jesus is preparing the apostles for persecution. I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Be on your guard. You will be handed over to the local councils and be flogged in the synagogues. On my account, you will be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, do not worry about what to say or how to say it. At that time, you will be given what to say. For it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of the Father speaking through you. And so I think it's interesting that he tells them to be as shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. You know, Jesus did not want his apostles to easily fall into traps. He was teaching them how to avoid traps without compromising the message. The instruction here is to be shrewd and to do no harm. There should be no deceit here. Now, snakes are crafty and they use that ability to hunt prey and to kill. Jesus is telling his disciples to understand what they are walking into, to be diligent in how you approach it, and to refrain from attracting unnecessary trouble. And when you do get into trouble, because you will, don't fight back and don't worry about what you will say, that you will be guided through the Spirit. Verses 21 through 26 go on to tell the apostles that the message will also divide, so that while the message of the gospel unites, it also has a portion of division. So it's going to divide friends and family. People will mistreat you and hate you, and you will be persecuted because of it. The opposition will come from within the church and from the government, and what Jesus is bringing forward is revolutionary. We've got a group of unschooled men who are going to teach the message of the gospel, and it's going to get recognition. It's going to get scrutiny. It's going to get hatred. It's going to get persecution from those in power. The unschooled and the illiterate are going to challenge the status quo of the world. So the gospel of Jesus Christ unites people. It brings together a tax collector and a zealot. And the gospel of Jesus Christ also divides people. And I think it puts us in two categories. It puts us into two categories, one being the kingdom of God and the kingdom of darkness. And this is also seen in the household. So you may have one family member who may come into the kingdom while others are content to stay in the darkness. So what appears to be a disagreement of religion is in reality a division of light versus dark. Verse 21, brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. Truly I tell you, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. The student is not above the teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for students to be like their teachers and servants like their masters. If the head of the house has been called Beelzebub, how much more the members of his household? So do not be afraid of them, for there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both body and soul. Are not two sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside of your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So do not be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Anyone who welcomes you welcomes me, and anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's honor, and whoever welcomes a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. And if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones who is my disciple, truly I tell you, that person will certainly not lose their reward. So any other thoughts or questions on Matthew chapter 10 before we move into Matthew chapter 14? Any other thoughts about the apostles, the message, and the way they were sent out? All right, we'll move into Matthew chapter 14. So here we've got the story of John the Baptist. And we'll start in here. This is after John has been captured. And so we'll start here in verse 1. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the reports about Jesus. And he said to his attendants, "This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead. This is why miraculous power is at work in him." By this time, everyone had heard of Jesus. If you hadn't seen him, you'd heard about him. And the stories people were telling made him known to everyone. And Herod the Tetrarch was no exception. He also heard these reports. This is Herod Antipas, one of the sons of Herod the Great. Herod the Great, as a reminder, was the ruler when Jesus was born. So what's a tetrarch? So according to the theologian William Barclay, a tetrarch is a ruler that is lower than a king. Herod desired to have a better title, and he asked the emperor to be called king, probably on many occasions, and he was refused. Over in the parallel passage in Mark 6, Herod is actually referred to as a king. And so we have what appears to be a discrepancy from the account in Matthew and the account in Mark. We don't know why exactly Mark calls him a king. This could be due to local customs. Most likely, reading through commentaries, this was used ironically. So this was more of like a slap in the face to Herod that, oh, he's king. So regardless of the why, the people knew Herod Antipas and they knew his character. Do you all remember any details about Herod Antipas and what he was known for, what his character was like? I see a couple people talking, but it looks like you're on mute. So Herod had a brother named Philip. Philip had a wife named Herodias, and Herod Antipas took his brother's wife as his own. So he dismissed his own wife and he married his brother's wife. Possibly this was one of the character traits that led the emperor to deny Herod the title of king. Looking down in verses 3 through 5, Now Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. For John had been saying to him, "It's not lawful for you to have her." Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered John a prophet. Going down in verse 6, on Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for the guests and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." The king was distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guest, he ordered that her request be granted and had John beheaded in prison. His head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. So we've got a lot that just played out here in this chapter. And so I guess the first question I've got is, who arranged for this dance? Who is the mastermind behind this? Who set this up?
Herodias might be a good choice.
Yeah. It seems as if Herodias was more than just a trophy queen. It seems like she was pulling a lot of strings with Herod, and it wasn't even above her to have her own daughter perform in ways that were completely inappropriate. We don't know for sure how old Herodias' daughter is, but verse 11 describes her as a girl and not as a woman or a young woman even. So this suggests that she's not old enough to be married. In that time, it would not be common for a princess to dance, especially in the way that was done at this particular party. It talks about that it's suggestive, it's immoral. You're looking at, a girl trying to entice, her father or father-in-law or others that are present. Another reason I think that the girl is underage is that when asked what she wants by the king, her first thought is to go ask her mother, what should I ask for? And so clearly, I think that if we look at Herodias, that the mother, she is the schemer. She is the one who is orchestrating this. And it kind of reminds me of another person in the Bible, Jezebel. And so if you look at the request, the head of John the Baptist is asked for. And so you can see that the message from John the Baptist was clear to Herod, but it was also clear to Herodias. And that while Herodias was sought by the king and was married by the king, it's clear that she's a part of this, right? She is taken to this lifestyle. She's taken to be the queen. And so she is supporting the king in this. There's a sense of urgency here. So if you look at what happens, they don't schedule an execution. This isn't set up for sunrise the next day or in a fortnight, but the head of John the Baptist is demanded immediately. So there's no time for loss of time. There's no opportunity for Herod to rethink. There's a sense of urgency applied. The same account in Mark 6, down in verse 25, says, "At once the girl hurried into the king with the request, I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter." And so if you think about what's going on here, there's a lot of deception. There's a lot of wickedness going on. Adam Clark is a theologian. He writes about Herodias. He says, Herodias was the daughter of Aristobulus and Bernice and the granddaughter of Herod the Great. So think about this for a second. Herodias' first husband was Herod Philip. That's her uncle. So gross. And if you look at the years afterwards, they don't go so well for Herod either. The father of Herod, Antipas's first wife, is the king of Petra. And so he's divorced the daughter of the king of Petra. And later on, this king is going to go to war against Herod and be victorious. So Herod's making a lot of really bad life choices here. Herod's brother Agrippa accused Herod of treason against Rome, and he was banished to the province of Gaul. So if you're looking for a model family, definitely don't look to Herod. And if you look later in Gaul, where Herod and Herodias are banished, they both end up committing suicide. And here at the end of the chapter here, so we've got a lot of bad things going on in the family of Herod, which ultimately ends in the death of John the Baptist. And there at the end of the chapter, we see that the disciples come and they take the body of John the Baptist away and they bury it. And I think the wording here is kind of interesting because it says they take the body of John, but they don't say they take John himself. And so I think that's very interesting that, that they understand that John is bigger than this life, that John had a very important purpose, and that John is with the Father. So it says, after, not part of this actual chapter, but when we look at verse 13, it wasn't in the text for today, but I want to read it because I believe it talks about the character of Jesus. It says, when Jesus heard about what happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. So I think in the midst of this, Jesus is hearing what happened. He knows that John is dead. He knows the corruption that has occurred, and he's very saddened by that. And so he withdraws to a place so he can grieve, so that he can mourn. He doesn't want to be around the people. And so any other thoughts on John the Baptist and Herod as we start to wrap up today?
The last point you made, David, about Jesus withdrawing, it becomes, I'm not saying clearer, but that's the word I'm going to use, that this is what awaits him at this point. He knows that, but it's like a vivid reminder that this is coming and soon.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think, we think of the divinity of Jesus, but sometimes it's hard to grasp the humanity, right? That he was in the flesh, that he experienced life as we do. He didn't desire persecution. He didn't desire to be put on a cross, right? He prayed, if there's any other way, let this cup pass from me. But he knew that was his fate. He knew that was the will. He knew that was the only way for salvation. And in one sense, he took that as joy, that was his lot, and that's what he was to do, to pursue that and to become that sacrifice for us. And in other ways, it grieved him, right? It grieved him deeply that he had to endure that persecution. He had to endure that shame, that he had no sin. And yet the punishment that we had for our sin was upon him. And so I think your points are very true, Greg, that he knew that his time was coming. And that had to be on his mind. I imagine it would be on his mind on a daily basis, right? Shortly after verse 13, I don't have it in front of me, but the people did come to Jesus even when he was in the solitary place, and he had compassion on them, and he spoke to them, and he healed them. So that even though he went and he grieved and he sorrowed, he quickly turned away from his own sorrow and grief and turned to the people. And so I think that's just amazing that, in the midst of such great suffering, that Jesus has this amazing compassion for the people. And so we see that Jesus is preparing the apostles, that he's teaching them, he's sending them out. He's sending them out first to the Jews. They're going to come to the Gentiles later. he's also going to be going through these towns and villages and teaching. And it just talks about the amazing, to me, it's just amazing how all this is built. It's not built in a way that we would orchestrate it, that we would put it together, and that even people as evil as Herod played a critical role in that gospel. How much more did that? Think about the disciples coming for the body of John the Baptist. They know they're being sent out. They know the risk that they're taking on by taking the message of Jesus out to the people. And, they're burying John the Baptist. So that had to just be a really intense thing for them to go through as well. The gravity of the situation just had to be immense for them. Thanks, Greg. Any other thoughts or comments about the passages today?
The whole lesson is we live by faith, and the apostles lived by faith, and they were taken care of by what Jesus would do for them and through his Spirit.
Thank you, Bruce. All right, well, that wraps up our lesson for today. So thank you all for joining in. Appreciate that y'all listening and participating. Thank you all very much. Have a great day.
Good class, David.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.